Hollywood was once celebrated as a machine that manufactured flawless ideals of feminine beauty, a place where every star had to be immaculate, down to the smallest detail from hair and skin to even the tone of her voice. Yet when the shocking truth was revealed that many of those dazzling goddesses were in fact born as men, the aftermath was not merely a collapse of reputation. They were stripped of their glory, cast out from the red carpet. The doors of film studios slammed shut in their faces, and they instantly became prime targets for the relentless tabloid press. Some were forced into exile, leaving their homeland to live in foreign lands. Others quietly withdrew, disappearing from the stage lights altogether, simply because they dared to live true to themselves. So who exactly were those once celebrated stars, those who secretly were born male? What had they been forced to sacrifice for the sake of glory, only to ultimately meet such tragic ends? Let us begin with the first name, Christine Jorgensen. 1. Christine Jorgensen, the woman who made America redefine femininity. On the morning of February 13, 1953, Idlewild Airport, New York now, JFK was buzzing as if it were welcoming a movie star returning from Paris. Flashbulbs went off nonstop. Microphones crowded together, and reporters from the New York Daily News Life magazine and NBC stood shoulder to shoulder. Yet the person stepping out of the international terminal was not Grace Kelly or Marilyn Monroe, but a face that only a few months earlier hardly anyone had known, Christine Jorgensen. Born in the Bronx under the name George Jorgensen Jr., Christine had once been a thin, quiet soldier serving in the U.S. Army. But deep within, George always felt trapped in a body that did not belong to him. After leaving the service, he happened to come across research from Denmark about pioneering gender reassignment surgery, something that at the time was far beyond what anyone in America could imagine. Without telling a soul, George secretly boarded a ship to Copenhagen, there under the guidance of Dr. Christian Hamburger. George underwent a series of surgeries and hormone treatments that had never before been attempted in the United States. Each incision, each dose of hormones broke apart the prison of his former body, until Christine was born, blonde-hair eyes shining with confidence, and a voice trained to erase every trace of the past. When Christine returned, the New York Daily News ran a bold headline, "Ex-GI becomes blonde beauty." The sight of her stepping out in a soft fur coat, white gloves, and neatly styled hair left America in shock. Overnight, Christine became a symbol of personal freedom, a name on everyone's lips from Manhattan bars to tea tables in California. But the light of fame always carried a merciless price. In a deeply conservative America of that era, Christine signed performance contracts with clauses requiring no disclosure of medical details to preserve her image. Rumor had it that a film studio once considered offering her a cameo, but only on the condition that a new birth certificate be created to support the publicity department's tale of the Bronx princess. The tabloids, however, never relented. One paparazzo claimed he had purchased Christine's original medical records from a former nurse and would only remain silent in exchange for a hefty sum. Even her private relationships were scrutinized to a suffocating degree. At one point, Christine considered a marriage of convenience with a gay actor to ease public pressure, but in the end, she chose to remain single. Appearing on The Tonight Show when asked about her journey, Christine simply smiled and said, "I haven't lost anything. I've only regained the person I always was." A few years later in glamorous London, another beauty suddenly found herself caught in the eye of a storm. Unlike Christine, however, her secret was not revealed by her own choice, but exposed by someone who had once shared drinks and whispered confidences with her. That person was April Ashley, and what awaited her was even harsher. To April Ashley, when a sister turned into a betrayer. On a late autumn Sunday morning, November 19, 1961, London awoke to a chill wind and an even colder piece of news. At every newsstand, copies of Sunday People sold out instantly. On the front page was a black and white photograph of supermodel April Ashley with a faint smile and a distant gaze beneath a glaring red headline, "Top model was once a man." Just days earlier, April had been one of the brightest names in fashion, in high demand, and even rumored to be cast as the lead in a major film. But in a single article, everything was erased. What wounded April most was not the article itself, but the person behind it. It wasn't a paparazzo nor a doctor, but rather a sister who had once performed with her at Le Carrousel in Paris. Someone who had helped her fix a stuck zipper, someone who had shared whispered secrets backstage. And yet, for $5,000, a staggering sum, at the time that person sold every detail of April's life, the surgery in Casablanca, her relationships, and things she had never wanted the world to know. That betrayal sparked a true firestorm. Within just 48 hours, her name was placed on the blacklist of London's fashion scene. Brands pulled away afraid of scandal and of being dragged into debates about what makes a real woman. Advertising contracts vanished. Photo shoot invitations went silent. A film studio in the midst of negotiations abruptly canceled her role. Rumors spread wildly. Someone unearthed her old birth certificate under the name George Jameson. A fashion house even planned to release a fake birth certificate to prove she had always been a woman. But instead of saving her, the stunt only made the press more ravenous. Even finding a place to live became an ordeal. Some London landlords flatly refused to rent to her, claiming they were concerned about the building's reputation. In the end, April left England. She moved to Spain and then the south of France, living away from the camera's gaze. The pain of that betrayal followed her for the rest of her life, not only because it buried her career, but because it had come from the very person she once trusted most. And yet, April was not the first to live with such a secret. Long before Christine Jorgensen and April Ashley in the early 20th century, Broadway and Hollywood had already been shaken by a name, Julian Eltinge, the man who played women's roles so convincingly that everyone believed he was truly a woman. And Julian's story was, in fact, a masterclass in the art of gender illusion. 3. Julian Elting, the fall of a Broadway goddess. In the early 20th century, when the word drag had yet to even enter the American dictionary, Julian Eltinge created a gender illusion so flawless that it deceived an entire nation. Born in 1881 in Newtonville, Massachusetts, under the name William Julian Dalton, he emerged from the lively vaudeville stages and quickly became known as the most beautiful woman in America, even though the undeniable truth was, he was a man. Audiences did not come to laugh at a ridiculous impersonation of a woman. They rose to their feet and applauded wildly because they believed they were watching a genuine lady. Julian mimicked every gesture, every smile, even the refined way New York's high society raised a champagne glass. The subtle pull of a glove, the graceful tilt of the head, the slightly hesitant glance, each was calculated with precision down to the rhythm of his breath. By 1912, Julian's fame reached its peak when a magnificent theater bearing his name rose on 42nd Street in Broadway, an honor that not even many Hollywood stars could dream of. He appeared on screen alongside Rudolph Valentino, earning $3,500 a week, equivalent to more than $60,000 today. At the time, the New York Times declared the most beautiful woman on Broadway, except she is a man. But Julian knew all too well that even the smallest crack could cause the entire illusion to collapse. For that reason, off stage, he cloaked himself in an exaggeratedly masculine image, smoking cigars, horseback riding, shooting rifles, and posing with hunting knives. He once told Variety, "If I cannot make you believe in my character, then I will quit the profession immediately." Then the tides turned. In the 1930s, America was swept by a wave of conservatism that branded female impersonation as immoral. Theaters were threatened with losing their licenses if men appeared in dresses. Julian, the man who had once enchanted thousands under the Broadway lights, was now forbidden to wear the very gowns that had defined his career. On some nights, all he could do was stand beside a clothing rack, pointing out each dress like a cheap salesman. The gowns that had once carried him to glory had become nothing more than cold, lifeless displays. From the equivalent of today's millionaire fees, Julian fell into hardship struggling to pay rent in Los Angeles. His fans vanished. The press forgot his name. Friends distanced themselves, for in that climate, even the faintest whisper of impropriety was enough to end a career. On March 7, 1941, Julian Eltinge died quietly in a small apartment. No family, no proper funeral, no remembrance of the fact that he had once been the goddess who captivated all of America. The price was cruel when the illusion shattered. What remained was simply a man rejected by society on both sides of gender. And ironically, while Julian had to create the perfect woman merely to perform on stage in Hollywood, at the very same time, Katharine Hepburn, a real woman of flesh and blood, stunned the entire film capital, simply because she steadfastly refused to wear dresses except when forced by a director. 4. Katharine Hepburn, the four-time Oscar lady and the rumor of using medication to alter her voice. February 1934 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, the 6th Academy Awards ceremony. Katharine Hepburn appeared not in the glamorous evening gown worn by nearly every other star, but in light gray trousers, a white shirt, and an oversized blazer. The entire ballroom buzzed with whispers. A journalist from the Los Angeles Examiner wrote, "She walked in as though she did not belong to Hollywood." And that is exactly why she did. Born in 1907 in Hartford, Connecticut, into a wealthy and intellectual family, Hepburn was raised in an atmosphere of freedom. But when she chose to pursue acting and signed with RKO Pictures in 1932, both her family and the studio urged her, even pressured her, to craft the image of a proper lady in order to be more easily accepted. An RKO studio photographer recalled, "We always kept at least 2 long gowns and a wide-brimmed hat ready on set in case the press showed up unexpectedly." Yet Hepburn never concealed her personal preferences. She often wore wide-legged trousers, men's Brooks Brothers shirts, and brown leather loafers purchased from a store on Madison Avenue in New York. That image made Hollywood both curious and uneasy. At the same time, rumors about her personal life began to spread. Beyond her well-known relationship with actor Spencer Tracy, Hepburn was said to have shared a deep romance with writer Laura Harding, whom she had met early in her career. They were spotted dining together privately at Manhattan's 21 Club and spending weekends at the seaside estate in Fenwick Old Saybrook, where Hepburn owned a holiday home. In 1942, a New Yorker reporter claimed to have seen Hepburn at a MoMA exhibition, hand-in-hand with journalist Claire Booth Luce, but the article was pulled before publication at the request of the studio. Another controversial detail, a former RKO sound technician asserted that Hepburn's everyday voice was considerably deeper than the one she used on screen. There were rumors she had once taken a tonic mixed with mild hormones bought from a Beverly Hills pharmacy to keep her voice higher and clearer, better suited to her roles as leading ladies who were strong yet elegant. Hepburn never publicly confirmed or denied any of the rumors. When asked about her fashion choices, she replied simply, "I only wear what makes me comfortable. If that bothers someone, that is their problem." Despite all the gossip, Hepburn carved an indelible mark in history. 4 Academy Awards for Best Actress, dozens of iconic roles, and an image that no one could replicate. Perhaps it was precisely the mixture of reality and rumor that kept the name Katharine Hepburn alive in Hollywood's imagination. And years later, when candy darling Andy Warhol's muse appeared and openly revealed every truth about her gender, Hollywood finally realized there are those who choose to live under the shadow of secrecy, and there are those who turn truth itself into power. 5. Candy Darling, Warhol's muse and the sad song that ended at 29. Before becoming Andy Warhol's muse, Candy Darling was simply James Lawrence Slattery, a frail boy living with his mother in a leaky-roofed second-floor apartment in Forest Hills, Queens. His father left when James was only 6, while his mother worked as a cashier at a nearby grocery store, constantly worried that her son was far too different. At school, James was a laughingstock. His voice was too soft, his walk too graceful, and classmates mocked him relentlessly. Once a group of students tore apart the silk scarf James was wearing and shouted, "Fake woman." Even his own mother had bluntly told him, "If you keep acting like this, don't expect anyone to accept you." At 17, James left home, drifting between Manhattan and Brooklyn, working nights as a diner waiter sleeping on friends' couches. One evening, staring at the mirror in his rented room at St. Mark's Place, James whispered to himself, "I will never live like this again." From that moment came the decision to transition, despite doctors' warning of great risks, since at the time both surgery and hormones were still unsafe. By the late 1960s, Candy, her new name, found her way to Andy Warhol's factory. It was a paradise of underground art, but also a world soaked in liquor, drugs, LSD, and endless nights at Max's Kansas City. Beautiful and different, Candy quickly drew attention. Yet she also soon understood that the price of being seen as a goddess meant giving in to proposals whispered behind locked doors. More than once, a party ended with her waking up in a stranger's apartment, unable to remember what had happened. Candy appeared in Flesh, 1968, and Women in Revolt, 1971, praised for her beauty like glass, fragile, radiant, untouchable. But behind the camera came the coughing fits, the weakening body. She kept performing, kept smiling, kept showing up at familiar Greenwich Village bars, but close friends noticed she was wasting away. In 1973, Candy was admitted to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, the diagnosis terminal cancer. Doctors told her she had only months left. In her stark white hospital room, features so unusual, they seemed almost unbelievable. 6 to Angie Dickinson, the unusual beauty with hard-to-explain edges. In the spotlight of Policewoman and Rio Bravo, Angie Dickinson embodied the model of the American screen siren confident sensual, with legs nearly perfect in length and form. But behind the lights, Hollywood whispered about a story that did not quite fit her glittering biography. According to a small article published in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner in May 1965, Dickinson had undergone a series of medical body modifications before signing a long-term contract with Warner Bros. What was striking was that the paper used the phrase body restructuring rather than cosmetic surgery, a choice of words rare at the time, usually reserved for gender reassignment cases. Further fuel came from behind-the-scenes photographs on the set of The Killers, 1964, taken by photographer John R. Hamilton. In several unretouched shots, Dickinson's neck and jawline showed visible tendons, her shoulders appeared slightly square, and her hands looked noticeably larger than those of other actresses of the era. The magazine Modern Screen quietly excluded those images, leaving them out of its special feature on Angie that year. Alan Whitey Snyder, the famed makeup artist known for his work with Marilyn Monroe, recalled in a 1972 interview. "One day, I teased Angie about her hands, said they looked like a basketball player's. She just raised an eyebrow and changed the subject. From then on, every time she posed for photos, she kept her hands tight against her hips or hid them behind props." The rumors escalated when a staff member from Culm High School, North Dakota, told the Bismarck Tribune that in the student records from the early 1940s, there had once been a name, Angus J. Dickinson, Jr., matching Angie's family address, but that the record had disappeared from the archives by the late 1950s. Of course, Angie Dickinson never once addressed such suspicions directly. She only laughed when a Variety reporter in 1978 asked about her beauty secrets, and lightly replied, "Hollywood lives on the things people can't prove." That silence only deepened public belief that part of Angie's story was something the stage lights had never revealed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Paris was ablaze with another woman, Coccinelle, the film star who transformed herself into a symbol of the transgender movement in Europe. 7. Coccinelle, the first transgender woman to be publicly married. On March 25, 1960, at the town hall of the 4th arrondissement in Paris, the bride Coccinelle appeared in a pristine white satin wedding gown, a veil flowing almost to the floor. Beside her stood the groom, Francis Bonnet, a young journalist from François. It was not just a wedding, but the very first time in French history that a transgender woman's marriage was officially recognized by law. The following morning, when the wedding photos appeared in the newspapers, François ran a shocking headline. La mariée était un homme. The bride was once a man. The storm had actually begun even before the ceremony. At first, the Civil Registry Office flatly refused to issue a marriage license, demanding that Coccinelle produce her original birth certificate bearing the name Jacques-Charles Dufresnoy. After weeks of heated disputes, and only with the intervention of a lawyer, she was finally granted papers that matched her true gender identity, something entirely unprecedented in France at the time. Few knew that before she became an icon, Coccinelle had grown up in a small apartment near Montmartre, the daughter of a street vendor mother and an often absent father. Lacking the warmth of family affection, she sought refuge in cabarets. At the age of 20, she set foot on the stage of Le Carrousel de Paris, the legendary venue where transgender performers donned lavish gowns and sang under golden lights, giving audiences a chance to forget reality for a while. Coccinelle quickly stood out. Her voluminous blonde hair, porcelain skin, and confident smile made her unforgettable. Yet to hold her place as a star, she endured tremendous pressure. Strict diets, regular hormone injections, and the social obligation she could not refuse if she wished to survive in the Parisian entertainment scene. After her wedding to Francis Bonnet, Coccinelle faced backlash from a segment of the public. Some restaurants refused to serve her, and certain cinemas quietly removed posters bearing her name. Nevertheless, she pressed on with her career, appearing in Europa di Notte 1959, Les Nuits d'Europe 1961, and devoting much of her time to legal advocacy, fighting for transgender people to have their gender officially recognized by law. When asked if she regretted having staged a wedding that created such a public shock, Coccinelle simply smiled and replied, "No, because if I hadn't done it, perhaps no one else would have dared." 8. Marlene Dietrich, the woman who dared to enter the battlefields of World War II. The 7th figure on the list is Marlene Dietrich. When the film Morocco premiered in 1930, the scene of Marlene Dietrich in a black tuxedo striding through a nightclub and suddenly kissing a woman on the lips sent theaters into an uproar. In New York and Los Angeles, audiences lined up around the block, but in the American South, the reaction was entirely different. Censorship boards in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida threatened to ban the film unless the scene was cut. A local paper in Montgomery even ran the headline, "Hollywood brings depravity to the South." Born in 1901 in Berlin as Maria Magdalene Dietrich, Marlene did not come to America waiting to be discovered like so many other actresses. She entered Hollywood already knowing exactly what she wanted, fully prepared to break every convention. The tailored men's suits, crisp white shirts, and polished Oxford shoes she wore were not just fashion choices, but statements of identity, a declaration of style that helped usher androgyny into popular culture. Off-screen, Dietrich was equally famous for her long and powerful list of lovers: actor John Gilbert, director Josef von Sternberg, Prince Louis Ferdinand of Prussia, along with endless persistent rumors of affairs with Greta Garbo and Edith Piaf. When pressed about it, she would simply exhale a puff of Gauloise's smoke, smile faintly, and say, "I don't like labels. They suffocate the imagination." The press of the era would not let her be. They mocked her masculine style of dress, insinuated her personal life was improper, and some Hollywood producers even hesitated to sign her to long-term contracts, fearing her non-conforming image might alienate audiences in conservative markets. The turning point came with the outbreak of World War II. Dietrich turned down lucrative Hollywood contracts, choosing instead to put on a uniform and perform for American soldiers on the front lines in North Africa and Europe. This decision earned her the U.S. Medal of Freedom and cemented her status as a heroine, yet in her homeland of Germany, many branded her a traitor. Dietrich's only reply was blunt: "I stand for freedom, and I will not apologize for that." Marlene Dietrich never sought to please everyone. She chose instead to be the kind of figure people could never stop talking about, whether with admiration or disdain. And that choice is precisely what made her a timeless icon. 9. Ray Bourbon, skirting the law to challenge the taboo and the cruel price to pay. Throughout the 1930s to the 1950s, Ray Bourbon was one of the most famous female impersonators in America. On stage, he wore glamorous evening gowns adorned with long, sweeping eyelashes, but he never attempted to hide his voice or mimic the gestures of a perfect woman. Instead, Ray maintained his masculine presence laced with sharp wit and a biting sarcasm that mocked even the very things society at the time tried so hard to conceal. He would often dodge the law through the use of double entendres the audience understood, yet the police could not find grounds to charge him. For instance, rather than saying it outright, Ray would drop a line like, "If you've never kissed a gentleman in a tuxedo, how do you know you wouldn't like it?" At well-known venues such as Club My Oh My in New Orleans or the Jewel Box Revue, audiences roared with laughter, both thrilled and nervous, aware that they were witnessing something deemed forbidden. Yet it was this very notoriety that made Ray a thorn in the side of conservatives, especially as the wave of anti-homosexual sentiment and strict stage censorship spread across the United States after World War II. By 1968, societal prejudice had tightened its grip on Ray's fate. That July, Aubrey Eberhardt, his longtime assistant and companion, was murdered in Big Spring, Texas. Many witnesses claim to have heard a heated argument between the two the night before. Some speculated it was about money, while others hinted at a fractured romantic relationship. When police launched their investigation, the image of the old man, who once wore dresses on stage and joked about men, instantly became part of an unspoken indictment. Texas newspapers splashed headlines like "Notorious Female Impersonator Linked to Murder," accompanied by photographs of Ray in his stage gowns, as though the dresses themselves were incriminating evidence. Ray pleaded innocence, insisting that at the time of the murder he had been elsewhere. But before a jury in a deeply conservative state, the image of a man who had once openly defied gender norms on stage stood little chance of being believed. In the end, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison. On January 19, 1971, Ray Bourbon died of pneumonia in a Texas prison at the age of 79. There were no stage lights, no cheering audiences, only a prisoner's file and a handful of performance photos now tainted with scandal. The lingering question remained: was Ray truly a murderer, or merely the victim of a trial where prejudice had convicted him long before the verdict? And if Ray chose laughter to challenge society's norms and paid for it with his freedom, then at that same time in Hollywood, Greta Garbo was carving out a completely different path. 10. Greta Garbo, the rumor of a name that vanished at 16. Greta Garbo was one of the rare stars who left all of Hollywood baffled. She rarely attended lavish parties, avoided cameras, and granted interviews that could be counted on one hand. The more she kept her distance, the more the public burned with curiosity, desperate to uncover what Garbo was hiding. Born in 1905 in Stockholm, Sweden, Garbo was brought to the United States by MGM in 1925 and quickly rose to become the queen of the box office. Throughout her career, she received countless marriage proposals from celebrated actors like John Gilbert and Charles Boyer. Yet she always declined with quiet grace. What intrigued people even more was that instead of appearing with men, Garbo was often seen alongside powerful women such as playwright Mercedes de Acosta or MGM screenwriter Salka Viertel. both believed to be the closest to her, traveling with her, sharing holiday homes, and constantly at her side in private moments. While the press still buzzed with speculation about her romantic preferences, another rumor exploded that Greta Garbo had in fact been born, a man under an entirely different name. According to whispers from Sweden, that boy vanished from official records at the age of 16. And at the same time, Greta Garbo appeared enrolling at the Stockholm Academy of Dramatic Arts as a young woman. No one could prove it, yet the fact that Garbo never spoke about her childhood only fueled the myth, with more and more details woven into the story. In 1941, after completing the film Two-Faced Woman, Garbo suddenly withdrew from the screen at the age of 36. She moved to New York, living in an apartment overlooking Central Park, occasionally walking alone with her hat pulled low and oversized sunglasses covering half her face. Her abrupt departure and reclusive lifestyle transformed her into a legend, not only because of her talent, but also because of the unanswered questions that would forever surround her. While Greta Garbo kept her life sealed tightly behind a veil of secrecy in 1970s America, another name emerged who chose the exact opposite path: Jim Bailey. 11. Jim Bailey. When Judy Garland was brought back to life on live television. One evening in 1970, American audiences watching The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson suddenly fell into complete silence. On stage, a young man appeared in a sparkling long gown, his hair in voluminous curls, and began to sing "The Man That Got Away." From the very first notes, the entire studio was transfixed with chills. The voice, the eyes, the phrasing, and the way he emphasized each word. Everything was so uncannily like Judy Garland that it seemed impossible. Just a year earlier, Garland had passed away, and yet at that very moment, the audience felt as though she had returned alive and present right before their eyes. When the performance ended, Johnny Carson left his seat and walked straight over to shake hands with the remarkable guest. A week later, Liza Minnelli, Judy Garland's daughter, came to see the show, and backstage she embraced. Bailey tightly moved to tears as she said, "Jim, my mother would thank you for bringing her back." What made Bailey truly extraordinary was that he did not stop at Judy Garland. With only a few minutes to change costumes and adjust his voice, he could transform into Barbra Streisand, Peggy Lee, or Phyllis Diller. Many recounted that even at private parties, Bailey would remain completely in character, from his walk and gestures to his voice, to the point where guests left unsure whether they had just met Jim Bailey or the star he was channeling. Of course, not everyone was immediately comfortable with it. Some television producers hesitated to invite Bailey, fearing that audiences might not accept a man who could impersonate women with such startling authenticity on national television. Yet every episode featuring Bailey drew surprisingly high ratings. His albums and tours were fully booked throughout the 1970s, carrying the art of female impersonation out of the smoky cabaret clubs and directly into the living rooms of mainstream America. At the very moment Bailey was savoring the peak of his career, Hollywood was buzzing with an entirely different story. One that had nothing to do with impersonation or transformation, but with a star long known as the Steel Woman of the silver screen. 12th, Barbara Stanwyck, the Ice Queen and the rumor that never faded. Barbara Stanwyck, born in 1907 in Brooklyn under the name Ruby Catherine Stevens, grew up in poverty, losing both parents at a young age. When she arrived in Hollywood, she quickly rose to prominence thanks to her cool demeanor, piercing eyes, and husky, low-pitched voice that stood in sharp contrast to the ingenue archetypes of her era. That very voice sparked a persistent rumor that Stanwyck had once taken low doses of testosterone to preserve her distinctive tone and her famously androgynous figure. There was never any concrete evidence, yet the rumor was kept alive by the way she dressed, often in suits, shirts, and trousers, even on the red carpet. Most notably, Stanwyck almost never revealed bare shoulders or flaunted a curvaceous silhouette. Several colleagues recounted that in the dressing room, she always changed her clothes alone, locked the door tightly, and allowed no one to enter. Her private life became a gold mine for the tabloids. She had an unusually close bond with actress Helen Ferguson and was frequently spotted spending long holidays with screenwriter Mercedes D'Acosta, who was notorious for her long list of female lovers. Actress Tallulah Bankhead once let slip at a party Barbara doesn't need to find a prince. She already is one, and she's got her own princess. In 1957, a reporter for Life magazine revealed that they had prepared to publish a piece exposing the powerful circle of girlfriends around Stanwyck, but the article was pulled at the last minute because Warner Brothers feared it would damage her carefully crafted leading lady image. Stanwyck never once denied or explained the rumors. It was precisely her absolute silence that allowed the story to linger for decades, becoming one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. And while those whispers continued to circulate backstage, Broadway and Hollywood were witnessing the rise of a new name, T.C. Jones, who elevated the art of female impersonation to such refinement that the entire entertainment industry was forced to acknowledge it as a true pinnacle of artistry. 13. T.C. Jones, the man who challenged the entire 1950s with his difference. In the 1950s, when America was still weighed down by rigid conservative standards, a man daring to step onto a Broadway stage in an evening gown, lips painted bright red, was no different from throwing himself straight into the eye of the storm. That man was T.C. Jones. Born in 1920 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Jones arrived in New York at the end of the 1940s, carrying with him the dream of a life on stage. At that time, even Broadway had yet to open its doors to female impersonators. They were still regarded as sideshow entertainment unworthy of appearing on major stages. Yet only a few years later, Jones broke through every barrier. His name appeared on posters in both New York and Los Angeles, and audiences packed theaters to watch a man embody Bette Davis Tallulah Bankhead or Katharine Hepburn with astonishing accuracy down to every glance and flicker of the eye. Tallulah herself even shouted in a theater, "Good God, he looks more like me than I do." The spotlight shone brightly on stage, but behind the curtains lurked a much darker reality. Whenever he toured the southern states, Jones was bombarded with anonymous letters threatening to beat or even kill him if he dared to keep wearing women's clothes. Once, right after a show in Texas, a group of men cornered him in an alley, hurling bottles and screaming, "Get out of here, you freak." From then on, Jones often had to hire bodyguards during his tours. The relentless pressure and fear gnawed away at him, dragging him into depression. Friends later recalled nights when Jones would sit silently in his darkened dressing room, still wearing his performance gown, holding a glass of liquor, without uttering a single word. In one rare interview, he confessed, "I can impersonate anyone, except myself." In 1958, Jones shattered yet another boundary by appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show, the primetime slot of American television. Millions of viewers were enthralled by his extraordinary transformations, but conservative groups erupted in fury, calling for a boycott of television that promotes deviant lifestyles. Even so, Jones never gave up. He continued to perform even as the shadow of violence and prejudice loomed constantly over him. Yet it was his persistence that paved the way for a new generation of artists who dared to turn the stage into a place to question the boundaries of gender. And among those who followed, but on an even larger and wilder scale, was Craig Russell, a man capable of transforming into dozens of screen legends in a single night. 14. Craig Russell, the man who carried all of Hollywood inside his body. In Toronto during the 1970s, the dazzling lights of Canada's biggest clubs suddenly converged on a single name, Craig Russell. In just one performance, audiences could see Judy Garland trembling before a microphone, Mae West casting a sultry glance at the front row, or Barbra Streisand lifting her chin to deliver a soaring high note, all brought to life with uncanny vividness. Russell wasn't merely imitating, he became them. But behind the stage lights, another story was whispered in the industry. Rumors spread that Russell maintained special relationships with men who held the power to shape his career. Among the names The Hollywood Reporter once hinted at were Rock Hudson, Anthony Perkins, and Tab Hunter A-list actors, handsome and powerful. One Broadway mogul was even seen leaving Russell's hotel room at 4 a.m., just weeks before signing him to a long-term performance contract. Russell's boldness extended far beyond the backstage. On one occasion, a conservative sponsor threatened to withdraw funding unless he toned down his female impersonations on television. In response, Russell strode onto the show in a sharp men's suit, but with makeup styled exactly like Judy Garland 10-inch heels, and sang an entire love ballad while staring straight at the sponsor. That night, the broadcast set a new ratings record. Yet that world was fraught with danger. Russell received a steady stream of anonymous letters threatening assault or even death whenever he performed in the South. During one tour in Dallas, a group of men surrounded the backstage vehicle demanding they drag that sick freak out. He escaped only because he happened to be riding in the Cadillac of an oil tycoon who coincidentally had been privately wined and dined by Russell just weeks earlier. A life of parties, hard liquor, the constant pressure to maintain his image and tangled relationships gradually eroded Russell's health. In early 1990, at just 42 years old, he was found unconscious in his Toronto apartment. The official cause was listed as complications from HIV/AIDS, but close friends insisted the real blow came when one of his most powerful backers, a Hollywood star himself, suddenly cut ties, triggering a cascade of collapsed contracts. Craig Russell passed away, taking with him secrets that neither Hollywood nor Broadway ever wanted exposed. But in the eyes of audiences, he would forever remain the man who carried an entire museum of movie stars within his own body. And of all the figures he embodied, none fascinated him more than Tallulah Bankhead, the real-life actress who herself was a storm of scandal, with every party and every quip she uttered capable of making the next day's headlines. 15. Tallulah Bankhead, the chaotic queen of Broadway and Hollywood. Tallulah Bankhead was a name unlike any other star Hollywood had ever produced. Born in 1902 in Huntsville, Alabama, she was the daughter of William B. Bankhead, who would later become Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. With such a background, Tallulah should have followed the path of a model daughter of the political elite. Instead, she chose the opposite, abandoning conventions, stepping onto the Broadway stage smoking like a gangster, downing hard liquor as if it were water, and speaking bluntly without sparing anyone's feelings. From the very start of her career, Tallulah shocked both Hollywood and the tabloids. At a Beverly Hills party in 1936, when a reporter teasingly asked, "How many men have you slept with?" she shot him a dagger-like glance and answered loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Darling, if you want a real scoop, you should be asking about the women too." From that moment on, her love life became an endless source of gossip. The list of names tied to Tallulah ranged from Billie Holiday, Hattie McDaniel, and writer Mercedes D'Acosta to a few of the most famous leading men like Gary Cooper and Marlon Brando. Rumors even spread that she had been romantically involved with an A-list actress and that the two had been caught together at a hotel in New Orleans, though the matter was quickly buried thanks to her family's political clout. Another rumor was even more shocking. Some journalists of the time claimed that Tallulah had actually been born male. In 1958, Confidential magazine published an anonymous article alleging that her original birth certificate had mysteriously disappeared when she was 16 years old, and from then on, only the name Tallulah Bankhead existed. When asked about it, she simply sneered, "If I were a man, I'd certainly be flirting with you right now." Offstage. Tallulah was notorious for her habit of never wearing underwear, even while filming or attending red carpet events. She once coolly told a photographer, "Honey, don't tilt that camera too low unless you want your paper to outsell the Bible." That defiance made her both revered as a symbol of freedom and reviled as a public menace. Some conservative groups even sent threatening letters promising to beat her up and teach her a lesson if she dared to appear in public that way again. Tallulah shot back on a talk show. "They threaten to kill me just because I'm different from them. But you know what, darling? Everyone dies, but living like me, not everyone dares." Tallulah Bankhead died in 1968, closing the chapter on a life that was chaotic yet legendary. The legacy she left behind inspired many drag performers, including Craig Russell, who idolized her as a character to embody, because no one else had ever been as fierce, as alluring, and as dangerous as Tallulah Bankhead. 16 Divine, the grotesque goddess and the death that stunned Hollywood. The final figure on today's list is none other than Divine. While most drag performers sought to recreate the softness and elegance of women, Divine born Harris. Glenn Milstead, in 1945 in Baltimore, Maryland, chose the exact opposite path. The more exaggerated, the more grotesque, the more shocking, the better. Glenn grew up in one of the most conservative families in Baltimore. His parents despised the sight of their son playing with dolls or wearing his cousin's dresses. Once, when they caught Glenn in female clothing in his room, his father dragged him out into the living room, slapped him in front of the entire family, and shouted, "You will never be a decent man." That humiliation haunted Glenn throughout his childhood and became the spark that pushed him to run away from home at the age of 16. From then on, Glenn drifted through gay bars, slept on friends' couches, started using extreme diet pills, then amphetamines to stay awake, and eventually cocaine, which would follow him for the rest of his life. When he met director John Waters, Glenn was reborn as Divine, a grotesque goddess with a towering beehive hairstyle, eyebrows arched up to his temples, skin-tight dresses that seemed to devour his body, and lips painted blood red. Under John Waters' direction, Divine became the dark heart of trash cinema. In Pink Flamingo's 1972, he shocked the world by actually eating dog feces on camera. Female Trouble 1974 turned him into a murderer, posing with his victims' corpses, while Polyester 1981 handed out scratch and sniff cards so audiences could inhale rancid smells during the screening. Yet behind the stage lights lay a chaotic private life. In underground circles, whispers spread that Divine had once been involved with singer David Bowie during Bowie's early 1970s New York years. Others claimed he had one-night stands with an MLB baseball star and even maintained a shadowy relationship with an older Hollywood producer in exchange for roles. These rumors were never substantiated, but they only added to his aura of dangerous allure. In 1988, Divine reached the pinnacle of his career with his role as Edna Turnblad in Hairspray, bringing drag closer to mainstream audiences than ever before. He was even cast in the sitcom Married with Children. His first male role, a clear sign that Hollywood was finally opening its doors to him. But just 3 days after the premiere of Hairspray, Divine was found dead in his Los Angeles hotel room. The official cause was heart failure, though friends believed that cocaine and sedatives had shattered his heart in his sleep. At 42, Divine's death ended a life filled with scandals, romances, and cultural shocks. He never wanted to be remembered for beauty, but rather for proving to the world that drag could be a slap in the face of conservative culture and still hold an audience spellbound.